Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Data Rights and Responsible Data Working Group webinar series. We're very, very pleased and happy to have together here 4 presenters that they're going to discuss a very, very interesting topic. And it is around empowering women for open data mapping in agriculture, implications on land rights in SDGs in Africa. So it is well known that empowering women to drive open data mapping in agriculture is a sure trigger of multiple and measurable targets of SDGs in developing African countries. Issues about women land rights, agricultural sustainability, and SDGs can be tackled with open data mapping. Today, we will have, as mentioned, this opportunity to shed light to these very, very important issues. I'm very happy to welcome our 4 presenters. And let me quickly introduce you to them. So we have Victor Sunday, who is a lecturer in Geoinformatics University of Port Harcourt and community leader for open data mapping, GEOSPATIAL, and participatory citizen science in Nigeria, and national coordinator of UNIQUEMAPPERS network. We also have with us Uchete Shirley Anaduaka. She is a lecturer in the Department of Economics, University of Nigeria, NUSCA, and doctoral researcher in the Department of Economics at Lingnan University in Hong Kong. Also, we have with us Natalie Sidibe. She's a board member, humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, fondatrice OSM at Mali, consultant cartographie numérique and SIG, sorry for my English, the last one. And we have also Dr. Tonin Ojo, who is senior lecturer in the Department of Agricultural Extension and Rural Development of the Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria, and he is also coordinator of the Obafemi Awolowo University, Sasakova. Once again, thank you for accepting our invitation. Without any further delay, I will leave Victor to start his presentation. Victor, I don't know if you're muted or not. Probably you're muted.
Okay, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. We are here to give a presentation on empowering women in agriculture, open data mapping, implication on land rights, and SDGs in Africa. And I look forward that it's going to be a wonderful presentation, and we're going to share our experience, the little experience we've gotten, and we'll be welcoming questions from everyone. When we talk about open data mapping, we are actually talking about empowering women. And here we want to say that women empowerment is so critical as open data mapping for sustainable agriculture, both at global levels and local levels. And so data about where and what should be, where and who is empowered is also critical as knowing where and who owns a parcel of land for agriculture. So the empowered woman is very powerful beyond measure, and beyond description. She's an epitome of a society that is empowered. So for us to drive women empowerment, we discovered that we need open data, and specifically open data mapping for agriculture, which is actually a short trigger of multiple and measurable targets of sustainable development goals in Africa. As a result of that, issues about women, land rights, agriculture, and sustainability, and the SDGs can actually be tackled with open data mapping. And so we are Unique Mappers leverages on open data mapping empowerment to GODAN Action, sustainable development, women inclusive community. As a result, we advise that this approach, which is positively impacting on agricultural sustainability, should be advocated for open data infrastructure, not just in Nigeria, but in the entire African space. What do we mean by open data mapping? Open data mapping refers to the acquisition, processing, management, and publication or geovisualization of georeference data. Open data mapping provides geospatial database. It provides maps and geoinformation that are freely accessible and available globally. Open data mapping provides opportunity for everyone to freely access, share, use, and reuse data about land use, farmlands, land rights, and whatever is mapped on the surface of the earth. And you can see an example of a platform that could be used for open data mapping there, which is the OpenStreetMap. So it provides opportunity for everyone to know what is where, how, and when, as well as who owns what, it's where. And so in this presentation, we'll be dealing with open data mapping with respect to SDGs. I want to say that critical geospatial data is very, very crucial for a measurable target of SDGs, because without data, there will be no upscaling for SDG targets. Data that is open, accessible, and available can be acquired, processed, and managed for each of the SDGs. This data can be geographically referenced to any of the ongoing SDG projects. And in this case, we talk about SDG 2, which is to drive zero hunger, and then SDG 5, which also is to drive women empowerment. So open geospatial data mapping provides opportunity for everyone to know what is where and how about each of these SDGs. What about open data mapping for land rights? When we talk about land rights, we are talking about data that describes who owns what, where, and how the ownership rights is described. And so open data mapping provides data for land rights. It provides opportunity for everyone to share and then use data about who owns what and where about the land. It provides opportunity to share parcel of land available for farming and other land use. It also provides data for sharing about land documentation, and in this case, it empowers women with land rights ownership. When we talk about open data, open geospatial data, we understand that there are so many benefits to that, because when we refer to open data, we are talking about data that is available to everyone, that is accessible. And when such data is geographically referenced to any location on the Earth surface, then you find out that there will be value added. And so such data could make everyone, could provide benefits such as findability, connectivity, interoperability, accessibility, as well as availability. What about to the farmers? because in this case, we are looking at the farmers, especially the farmers in Africa. You find out that open data mapping will enhance agricultural digitalization. It will also enhance smart technology. It will also ensure that the farmers are able to be assessed. There will be findability and there will be connectivity, and then there will be availability. That means that whatever the farmers are producing, people all over the world could know that this farmer is actually producing this. Thank you very much for that introduction. We'll be going over to other presenters that are here with me, and we'll be dealing with the African women in agriculture, and that will be presented by Toyin Ojo, and then we'll take over to the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunday. He has just presented his own work on the open data mapping. I'll be discussing women and crop production. It is a truism that 49.6% of the world population are women, and between 60 to 80% of women produce food and other agricultural products in Africa. And not only that, about 70% of world female population live in the rural area. And the roles of women are multifaceted. There are many. They serve the role as mothers in the rural environment. Not only that, they also help in agric production and agric processing of food stuff that is eventually transported and utilized by the end users. Not only that, they assist in fetching water, fetching wood, and in cooking. In fact, scholars have summarized these activities, these roles of women, into reproduction, into productivity, and community management. So these are the various roles that women play, even in rural households. And it is noted that many of them are involved in agricultural production and processing. And these roles of women have increased with their increased involvement in commercialized production of agricultural products. So they are also, apart from this, there are roles in the home. They are also involved in planting activity, weeding, harvesting, processing, marketing. If it is critically looked, it will not be understatement that women in agriculture, the volume of involvement in farm activity, if it is critically looked at, can be measured to be more than even that of the men, because men they have access to the land, purchase of the land, do land clearing, burning, and eventually cultivating cash crops like cocoa and major crops in Africa. But the issue of farm maintenance, weeding, spraying, harvesting, processing, we discovered that many of these activities, women are found to be the major game player there. So, and with this, we discovered that we're talking about women in crop farming. This is the volume of activities that they are involved in. We not talk about their access to land. True, we'll talk about land rights. Land rights can be seen in three major ways. That is the right to use, the right to transfer, and the right to exclude others from using of the land. But basically in Africa, the land tenurial system, all this while, have practically placed women as temporary custodians of land, as it is passed by inheritance from the father to the eldest son or the sons, as the case may be. Land transfer has not been the case of transfer of land from the father to the daughters or to the wife. And in cases where the woman loses the husband by one reason or the other, it is often time, if the woman will possess the land, sometimes it will just be for a temporary time, holding land in place for the children as they watch the children grow. And when they become mature, those lands are eventually transferred even to the children. In Africa, many governments do have land policies. These policies were put in place in a way as to help to see that control of land is in the government. Those who would want to access land, they can access it easily. But for the women, like government policy, it owes land in trust in the hand of the state. But for women to access land in Africa, it's increasingly getting impossible. And by inheritance, they cannot get land. And if women must purchase land, which is a right of theirs, most times they have to go through a male factor, maybe the husband, maybe the relation, or maybe the son. And in Africa, women don't generally own land by inheritance. They believe that, okay, if the woman inherits the husband's land, and probably she's still young, and she's still marriageable, by marrying another man, they believe that the land can be transferred, and the ownership of land can be transferred to the other male factor who may be coming in to be the husband, and by so doing, that family loses that land. So land ownership is very critical in Africa. So land ownership and land as only as land as a property. As ownership, you have control. As a property, it's in your possession. But for women, that control over land is really, really not there. So in Africa, so possessing the land is purely by family rights, where the family land is owned by the man, the wife under the man, and the children, the eldest son, is their control of the land. So by that token, the right of women to land in Africa is kind of difficult. But recently, women are trying to fight for their rights, getting together into groups. Women groups have come pulled souls together to annex land by purchasing and owning land, and seeing that many of them are increasing in number in agricultural production, trying to expand their trade because of the issue of increasing women household headship. Women-headed household has been on the increase in Africa. In the Caribbean countries, like a kind of a right, women do it there. But in Africa, for a woman to be an head of a household is increasing these days, seeing that the fact that many men, by reason of migration, for better opportunity, they move down to cities, and by so doing, they leave the women back home, and with their labor and activities to feed the home, they take over the land, but actually the right of land do not really belong to them. Then women household is increasing also by reason of divorce, then by reason of deaths. The average lifespan of many Africans get reduced, so they get to becoming female household heads. So as per this, the increased activities of women in agriculture is noted, both in crop production, in fish production, and in agribusiness. They are on the increase. Since they are partaking almost every activities of the value chain, right from crop production to crop harvesting to crop processing and the eventual marketing. You find the women there. In fish production, they have rights to harvest the fish, and note this also, most of the product that these women harvest and process, they go to sell. They still come back home, the men still take charge of the proceeds of this farm before they distribute to the women. So Women in fisheries also, we discovered that the right to access of boats fishing into the interland inside the sea is also the exclusive preserve of men. Women are only allowed to crop fish within the home environment or near the seaside. So the real right of women to really go to deep sea fishing is not there, and they are only limited to the issue of processing and eventual sale of this fish in the farm outlets. So all said and done, in the fishery and the forestry aspect of women in agriculture, women are also involved in non-timber forest products. Men basically they engage in tree felling, logging, and eventual sales of those trees for building purposes. But women in the non-forestry production, non-timber forest products, many of them they are involved in picking of snails, harvesting of mushrooms, then packaging of leaves that can be used for storage for other products. So these are the basic activities that many women are involved in. And like my previous presenter also said, the issue of open data mapping will be needful and be necessary to identify these activities and document it so that activities of women and will be noted, and where there will be need for government assistance or non-governmental organization assistance, we can identify these activities wherewith we can come up with policies that can empower women, that will get them more value for the labor which they spend in agriculture. So far, so good. I would like to hand over presentation to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony Ojo, for that presentation on the African women in agriculture. We'll be having Nathaniel Sidibe be talking to us on issues of land rights, women in agriculture.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, as the other presenters said, please, Victor, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so in Africa, as already said by the other presenter, gender discrimination in land ownership rights and access prevents women and their communities from realizing their full potential and contributing to sustainable development. So this is despite the many benefits that can be derived from strengthening land rights. As we can see on the diagram here, women perception about various factors in relation to women's land ownership. So some believe that increase in confidence, improved decision-making position, social economic empowerment, no economic crisis. So you can notice that some are agree and some disagree about those. Also, there are next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so there are some countries who are doing their best and focusing on the recognition of women land rights protection. So we have Ethiopia, we have Ghana, we have Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, Nigeria, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zambia. we have already. Next slide, please. Go back, please. Okay. Wait. Okay. Okay. So we have for allowing people, women, to belong land in Africa. We have some strategies which can allow us, which can permit us to achieve our goals. Last slide, please. Victor, can you go to the strategies slide? Okay. So here are some strategies for reinforcing and securing women's land rights. Go to the, okay, thank you. Oh. Victor, can we see the strategies slide, please? Okay, so here are some strategies for reinforcing and securing women's land rights. So we have to focus on raising awareness. Okay, thank you. So we have to local leaders and women have to focus on raising awareness, to building prevalent custom and even religious belief, because we can also we have to know that religious belief also are very can be some difficulties for women to learn right, and even to be engaged in public life. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Yeah, I'll be taking the next presentation on open data mapping, unique mappers approach. Yeah, we want to look at what we've been doing here in Nigeria with Unique Mappers Network with respect to open data mapping empowerment for women. And so we look at the Unique Mappers mission and mandates, open data, geospatial data, open geospatial data mapping, women empowerment, then the OGRUTE MAPATHON for SDG 2 food security, and then IWD and gender equality and COVID-19 food intervention. Why do we why do we engage women for open data mapping? We engage women for open data mapping to ensure that they are empowered, and so open data mapping provides geospatial skill empowerment for women. It provides opportunity to bridge the gap in gender digital divide, and then it gives them opportunity to freely share, use, and reuse data about land use, farmlands, land rights, and whatever is mapped on the Earth surface, like I said previously. We empower them with open data mapping so that they can also know their rights and benefits with respect to land and other issues. And so most women in Africa, especially the widows and the rural farmers, they need to be empowered with open data mapping so that they can know what and where, where and what is where. And so one of the projects we've been able to handle recently, although it's still ongoing, is that of OGRUTE UGWU for SDG2 food security. This is a project we carried out to provide a global accessibility of a community that is called OGRUTE, which is in Enugu-Ezike in Enugu State, Nigeria. And so OGRUTE community is the epicenter of a hill that is called UGWU, which is more than 562 meters above sea level. UGWU seasonally produces 13 edible species of mushroom, and that was the main reason why it caught our attention. And so we needed to provide geospatial data, open geospatial data about that particular hill. And so we all know that mushroom globally is highly nutritious and very good to health with dozens of minerals and vitamins. And that's the more reason why we need to know about this particular location so that it can be globally accessible. Open data mapping for OGRUTE provided critical geospatial data for SDG2 measurable targets so that we can see how mushroom is contributing to food security, is contributing to SDG2 in terms of nutrition. And so while we're carrying out this project, we administered a survey to assess the chain value of this mushroom, and about 100 participants in that particular community were sampled. And a report indicates that this mushroom, 13 edible mushroom, grows seasonally, most especially during the rainy season. And so for the chain value of this mushroom, data about the benefits of the mushroom, the productivity, the frequency of consumption, and type of farming was also carried out and assessed. And for land rights data, about we were able to collect data about the household, the land ownership, the type of building, the purpose of building, as well as the year the building were built. And then we were able to map about more than 5,000 buildings. That is to say that more than 5,000 buildings were added to OpenStreetMap for this community. And we all know that OpenStreetMap is a globally accessible map of the world that is free and available for anyone to use. And so we had this map showing the heat map of the participants that were administered, the cluster of the sampled participants. And then you can see also from the map the buildings that were added, and you can see the topography of the area. You can also see the particular hill within this cluster of participants and so on. So with this, we were able to provide the global accessibility for this particular community, and to promote SDG2, to promote mushroom productivity in that particular area. Another area aspect we've been driving open data mapping empowerment for women is through the International Women's Day, which for the past 3 years we've been making sure that we host this event in all our centers across Nigeria. And then we also bring it together with the Open Data Day, which provides opportunity for women empowerment with open data mapping. So we, for this last March, we're able to bring the two global events together to drive open data mapping empowerment for women. You can see we're able to mobilize the young girls, we're able to mobilize the women, and then we're able to show them how they can use the mobile mapping tools to identify agribusiness locations that are owned by women in their communities, so that once they are able to tag that agribusiness location, the name of the owner, the type of business, the contact details, and so on, you find out that once it is published on OpenStreetMap, it becomes globally accessible. We also taught them how to actually map and digitize buildings, farmlands, and so on, and able to use other mobile mapping tools so that they can actually drive open data mapping. Another, you can see these are some of the participants during the last Open Data Day and International Women Day. Then recently also with this COVID-19 pandemic, we've already started mapping for COVID food security, food distribution with an NGO in Abuja, and precisely we're able to collect data about food intervention in Paduma village, which consists mainly of poor farmers in Nigeria. Paduma is within the FCT Abuja, and so the impact of pandemic COVID-19 necessitated for food intervention for this particular community, as well as other areas. And so we are collecting data that could be made accessible, that could be accessible by anyone using a mobile data collection tool. And the data collected helps to know where and how palliative measures were dispersed or distributed in those communities, and then we'll be able to also identify areas where there is need. So with this, you find out that we carry along women, and in order to ensure that we drive on SDG 5, we ensure that we carry along gender inclusive, women inclusive community participation in all our open data mapping engagement, community engagement. Thank you for listening to this section. We'll be going over to Uchechi, who will be presenting to all, giving us a presentation on the implication of open data mapping on SDGs and land rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunday, for that. So I'll be talking about open data mapping, implications for agriculture, women's land rights, and the SDGs. So I'm Uchechi Shelley Anaduaka, and I'm part of the Unique Mappers Network, Lion Mappers team
Nsukka, Enugu State, Nigeria. So this is the overview of the presentation. So first of all, why do we need to talk about agriculture? Why do we need to talk about women? And then of course the SDGs. And what are the implications of open data mapping on these three areas, agriculture, women, and the SDGs. So first of all, I'll be talking about why agriculture. And in Africa, 38.4% of all our land can actually be used for agricultural purposes. However, not all of it is being used, and 24.5% of it is for planting of crops. If we move down to Nigeria, in the case of Nigeria, it's actually 77.4%. That is, out of every 10 plus of land, almost 8 of it is available for agriculture, and 57.2 of that is available for planting of crops. So the question there is, if we have so much land, why then are we poor and hungry in Africa? And I believe that there are two basic reasons for this. And the first one is that the land is not put to use. And the second one is that the land is not put to good use. So one of the big issues that happens in a lot of developing countries, especially in my home country, Nigeria, is that agriculture is being looked down as a kind of, it's not a reputable lifestyle. So it's for people who are poor who should go into agriculture. So most of the young people are trying to move into the service sector. They want to work in the banks. They want to work for the public sector, work as lecturers or things like that. They don't want to actually work in agriculture. And so one of the problems with that is that when we leave agriculture into the hands of the poor people, a lot of them do not have the resources to actually do good agriculture. They cannot afford fertilizers. They cannot even afford to buy quality crops. So what happens is that they tend to do very small scale farming. And so that's why we have a lot of food insecurity problems in Africa. So one of the ways government tries to come into this is to, provide some fertilizers or some infrastructure for these farmers, but then it's still not enough. And then we also have this status problem where even though we have this produce, we still want the ones that are imported, and so we have a lot of waste that happens in our agricultural service. So when we talk about open data mapping, when we talk about development or agricultural transformation in Africa, we need to really look into whether we are using our land or the existing land for agriculture, whether we're using it, and even when we're using it, are we using it for what it is for? So there are land which are supposed to be used for crops. They're actually used for growing of animals. So that means that you're not actually using the land for what it is best for. And so it's very important that we look into that. So the second thing is, why do we need to talk about women? So it's common knowledge that women hold up 1/2 of the sky. So in terms of sex ratio, it's almost 1:1. So 49.3% of the world's population is actually woman. It's actually female. And another important thing about women is that still, even though we are moving into this whole gender empowerment, women are still considered to be the primary caregivers, both in terms of nature, they actually still give birth to children, and in terms of nurture. So even when after giving birth, for the first few years, they tend to spend more time with the children, spend more time in the household. And that's why a lot of development goals are targeted at women, because there is this assumption that because women make up this greater proportion of caregivers, when you give them more resources, they tend to use it for the betterment of themselves, their children, and their entire household. So it's very important that we put this in mind and when we are thinking about development. And another interesting thing about women is that because of these traditional constructs that we place on our women, because we think that their roles are best served in the household, they're thus more likely to be excluded from economic activities. So they don't work outside the home, and because they don't work outside the home, we are still at a certain point where we've not yet understood how to compensate women for in-house activities or in-house economic activities. If you live in a household where you take your clothes to the dry cleaner, you pay the dry cleaner. But in the house, when a woman does the washing, how does she get compensated? Because in our society, we believe that that's the responsibility of the woman, and so she does not need to be compensated for that. And so because of this, they're also excluded economically. They're also excluded socially. In a lot of societies, we still have a lot of cultural restrictions on women, where women are not supposed to go outside of the household for certain reasons. And so because of these things, they are more likely to count among the poor people in the world. And so these exclusions make them less likely to own assets. And for instance, if we are thinking about owning a bank account or a mobile money account, you definitely need documentation. How many of these women can actually have the right documentation to actually own a bank account? So according to the World Bank data, only about 27.3% of women actually own a bank account in Nigeria. And in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, that's just 36.9. That's not even up to half of the women. The second thing why we need to consider women is that they also make a significant part of the agricultural labor force, both in sub-Saharan Africa, actually. In Nigeria, they make a lower aspect of that, and that's because some of the things that have come up in this discussion already is that women's land rights are not yet appreciated. So most times, because they do not have access to these lands in terms of ownership structure, they do not benefit from farming. They do not benefit from working in the agricultural labor force, and so they are also tending to shift into the service sector, working as clerks, working as salespeople, and leaving the agricultural labor force. And then the third thing, which is linked to this, is, as we've said, the land rights. So only not up to 20% of women in Nigeria actually own the land, and this has a lot to do with the way our culture is. For instance, in my own culture, I'm Igbo in Nigeria, women do not inherit land. You can purchase land, but how many women can actually afford to purchase land? So there's a lot of exclusion that keeps women really stranded, and some of this burden is kind of lifted up as women become more empowered, become more educated. But for the greater population of women, they actually do not have that education that can liberate them to some certain extent, where you can get educated, get access to better jobs, and then you can afford to actually purchase land for yourself. So these things actually makes it very important that we talk about women when we are thinking of development, thinking of agriculture, and thinking of the SDGs. So the third thing is looking at the SDGs itself. So the SDGs was born out of after the MDGs ended in 2015, and we have 17 goals and over 169 targets and over 200 indicators. And so these indicators are actually, if you look at them critically, you see that a lot of them actually focus on agriculture, actually focus on women. So women stand at the center of achieving almost all the SDGs. If you are thinking about, like I said earlier, women are considered as primary caregivers. So if you are thinking of how to empower a household, the first starting point obviously will be how to empower the women in the household. There are a lot of development projects that go on, and when they try to look at who to target, especially in terms of if you're thinking of targeting women, children, for instance, you obviously want to target the person that spends the most time with the children, and that's women. So if we are going to get to the point where we can transform our agricultural sector, can improve the well-being of women, then we can actually get closer and closer to meeting the measurable targets of the SDGs. So here I highlighted 4 of the goals, but like I said, a lot of the goals are actually women centric. But these 4, I think, are quite critical because these 4 also have wide connections with all the other goals. So the first one is no poverty. So we want to get to a point where there is no extreme poverty anymore. And women are quite important in that. Agriculture is quite important in that. Regardless of how developed the world is, we still need food. We still need food security. Man must also eat. So agricultural transformation is very important if we're going to get to the point of eradicating poverty, because we still do not have enough education in Africa to think about, very widespread or very deep service sector. So we have to still rely on agriculture, because in terms of looking at agriculture, it's not just one sector. Agriculture is a very broad sector. You think about the farming, you think about the fertilizers, you think about extension. So there are so many places. And so if we think about diversifying, agriculture is a very good way to go about it. And the transformation of agriculture is also linked to goal 2, and women are also linked to goal 2. Because if we have enough food, then we will no longer be living under food insecure conditions. And then women, especially for instance pregnant women, have to have enough nutrients to be able to take care of their babies that are in utero and ensure that they have the right nutrients after they are born. So you see that agricultural transformation and well-being is quite linked to achieving this second target. And of course, gender equality. And so this gender equality is one of the hardest things to conceive, especially when we're thinking of Africa, thinking of Nigeria, because a lot of people have this misconception of what gender equality is. And so it's quite important that we create more awareness about this. And then the last one is about the reduced inequalities. So if we are able to ensure that there is no poverty, there is no hunger, women and men, when they are actually having access to the same opportunities, actually have the same level of benefit, which is not even limited to just Africa. It's a global concern that women are still underpaid even when they have the same jobs with men. And so it's quite critical that we look at that. So how can we achieve what is the purpose of actually achieving the agricultural transformation? So one way is that we can develop sustainable food and agricultural programs that address critical challenges in providing affordable, nutritious foods and strengthening livelihoods. So it's not just having that people are farming. Are they farming? If you're farming, if you don't have a very large farm, for instance, or you do not have access to resources for farming, then your farm produce might be more expensive. And so when you take it to market, then you actually struggle to sell. And also, if you're not using the right seeds or the seeds that are of good quality, then we're not going to get enough of the nutrients. And so it's quite important that our programs think about these things, right? And also strengthening livelihoods, of course. So regardless of what we might think, agriculture is still a very, very integral part of our development in Africa, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry. And so without mincing words, achieving the SDGs cannot be possible without women. Women hold up half the sky, as we've talked about. They are the primary caretakers of the household, especially children. An improvement in gender inequality, or reduction in gender inequality, reduction in the inequalities in general, would definitely go a very long way in the achievement of the SDGs. For example, if we're thinking of why gender equality is important, there is a very widespread literature, both in the social sciences in general, that talks about, you know, how children imbibe the culture that they grow up with. So if you live as a child in a household where your mother is empowered, where your mother goes out to work, there is a tendency that you're going to imbibe those cultures as you grow up. And then we now start to have intergenerational improvements. So women are quite important with that. So then we move over to what are the implications of open data mapping for these three areas. So the first one is agriculture. So now that we know that agriculture is important, how then do we use open data mapping to achieve improving agriculture or transforming agriculture in Africa, in Nigeria? We can map land use. So one of the things is, where are we currently farming or rearing livestock? So we want to know where, because we've already said that there are certain lands in Africa, in Nigeria, that the soil is of good quality for us to farm. Some of them are not actually good for farming or planting of crops, but we can actually use them to rear livestock. One of the big concerns in Nigeria currently is the people who rear cattle in the north, and because of the climate, they then tend to move to the south, right? And so this kind of thing has been causing a lot of conflict. But if we can map land and see, okay, this place has the right conditions for rearing this particular livestock, then we are able to build sustainable projects in those areas so that they don't have to move from north to south, from south to north. They can remain in one place, as we see in many of the developed countries. So we want to also know what kind of crops are grown. Like Mr. Sunday talked about the OGRUTE place where there is mushroom. So some of these things we don't know because we do not have access to it. But if we can map it, then we know that, okay, this place is actually viable for growing mushroom. So programs will be targeted at improving mushroom farming in that area. We can also map where we rear pigs, where we rear chickens, where we rear whatever fish and all that. And then we also want to know who is farming or who is rearing livestock, because we tend to also have this gender divide in terms of roles. Even in farming and rearing livestock, there are some commodities or some crops or some livestock that are considered women, there are some that are considered men. I listened in on a colleague's presentation this afternoon, and where he talked about in Ghana, where the fishing sector is quite male dominated, and the reason is because they feel that men have to, you know, bring in the fish, and then it can be quite heavy for women. And so some of these things are very important. The second thing is that we need to map land ownership. Where do we have women? Because even though we talk about in general that there are a lot of land rights issues, not all places are the same. I do know that in Ghana, there are cultures that are matrilineal. So we cannot just hide under the umbrella that everywhere is homogeneous. So mapping this land ownership, knowing which culture exists where, will be very important for the agricultural transformation. The third thing is to map access to resources. So farming is not just coming out of your house and planting maize. You have to know what kind of crops, what are the seasons that are ripe for those crops. You also need to know what type of farm you want. Do you want a small farm just to feed you and your family? Do you want a farm that you can commercialize? And so if you have to think about that, you have to think about the farm hands who are going to assist you. Do you need to rent people only for the planting season? Do you need to rent them or hire them for the harvest season? You also need to have access to fertilizers. And then finally, last but not the least, and access to resources is enabling infrastructure. And this is actually a very big issue. And so there is actually a very wide gap or wide opportunity for open data mapping here, and that is mapping infrastructure, mapping roads, because after we plant, after we harvest, we need to take to market. So we have to know how we can quickly get to market for these farmers to sell their produce. We also need to map where do we have, for instance, blackouts. Where do we not have people connected to the national power grid? We have to map people's access to water. Not everybody lives close to water. Some people actually live in places that suffer. They have very large droughts or floods or things like that. So that's also another opportunity. I also need to map financial services. So financial services, I think the last time I checked the data, in Nigeria, we don't even have up to 30% of people who have access to financial services. And so we also need to map where people have access to financial services, where are there banks, where are they mobile money agents, where are they different financial insurance companies and the rest. And then the last thing under agriculture is mapping temporary and permanent fallow land. So we know that there are some crops that need you to, after planting, after harvesting, you need to let the land go fallow for a bit of time. And so we need to know where we have permanent fallow land that is no longer available for agriculture or needs to be tilled or taken care of so that we can start to grow crops again, or we can transform it in terms of using it to rear livestock. So for women, the mapping is actually an exceptional skill that women can develop. I actually stumbled upon it during my doctoral research, and I found it to be so important because it helps you to tell data beautifully. And as a woman, it's actually one of the skills that you can pick up, and it's open to different kinds of women. A lot of women are stay-at-home moms who are looking out to things that they can do while still remaining at home. So they can stay at home and map. All you need is either a laptop or a phone, and then you can connect to the different tools and begin to map. Career women who are looking for side hustles or side opportunities can also go into it. Or you can even use it in terms of, if you're so interested in volunteering for achieving the SDGs, mapping is very important. So working with women in open data mapping can also help us to focus on things that women care about, but these things are quite sensitive to men. So there are women-centric needs and priorities, and sometimes when we think about these things, or when roundtable discussions are open, we actually see that men are full around the table, and they don't really understand women's opinions about these things because they do not consult women on those issues. So one of the key things is women's health, right? You can't, if you look at data on women's health, you actually see that in so many developing countries, men actually make the decisions over women's health. In terms of access to contraception, is one very important case. And so there's a lot of debate, and men and women don't, mostly on average, don't seem to agree with who holds the right to decide whether they should use contraception in a relationship. Things like fertility and child rearing, access to prenatal services and skilled birth attendants, even HIV and clean water points, because most times you still see that women are the ones who still have to, or young girls still have to go fetch water for their households. The second thing here is on women's safety. So intimate partner violence, a lot of it is talked about, and it's one of the central points when we do the International Women's Day. Even as we are experiencing the COVID-19, there are a lot of cases already reported in terms of intimate partner violence. So we can actually use open data mapping to see which societies, which states, which countries are actually following the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We can use open data mapping to see how there's access to toilets, especially for young girls still in schools who need to deal with their menstruation and things like that. We can also use it for sexual harassment cases, especially in workplaces and schools. We can use open data mapping for mapping vending machines where they sell sanitary products, places to change a baby's napping, especially, and also for street lighting so that women can still move about at night. The third thing is about women's education. We still have, for primary level, I think a lot has been done in terms of bridging the gender gap. But at the secondary and tertiary school levels, we still have a lot to do. And so open data mapping can help us to tell the story about that. And also vocational training centers where women can get skills in terms of like sewing and other skills where they can use to start up small or medium businesses. We can also look at open data mapping can also be used for looking at women's economic empowerment. How many women are enrolled in the formal labor market? How many are in the informal market? How many are participating in household decision making, ranging from their earnings to their health, to their husband's earnings? We can also look at their use of earnings, both in and outside their household. So for SDGs, we can also use open data mapping to map the infrastructure that are related to the SDGs. For example, schools, health centers, and vocational training centers. ODM can also be used to empower people, especially young people. We do know that youth unemployment is a big issue. And so by the time we offer trainings and skill workshops for learning about open data mapping, they can use these skills to get access to livelihoods. They can sign up for there are a lot of job opportunities now, or even volunteer programs, like for instance, the United Nations Volunteer Program, where they can sign up to map. They can join the OSM register and start mapping. So they can volunteer as part of the citizen science movement. We are all called as humans to actually help to achieve the SDGs. So achieving the SDGs is not just about finance, it's also about helping to know where exactly we are struggling in terms of achieving the measurable targets. We can also use ODM to map the actors in the open data space. So there are some actors that are very that are working critically in terms of women-centric SDGs. Some are working for children, targets, for instance, birth registration, nutrition, education, decent work for youth, for women again, and no hunger. So what are some platforms that can help with this? MAPATHONs, workshops, seminars, conferences like this can also help, to open up the discourse about open data mapping, because a lot of people do not actually know about it. And so sometimes, especially among researchers, we say, I'm looking for data, but this data, I need to buy it. And so with open data mapping, you can give people the opportunity to have access to quality data so that they can tell better stories, because maps are actually a very good and simple way to actually tell beautiful stories about the achievements of the SDGs. So to round up, I'll say that in Africa's Agricultural Transformation Program, open data mapping and the promotion of the SDGs, women must be at the center. Why, again, if you may ask, is that they make up a substantial part of the agricultural labor force. They are also the household's primary caregiver, and are also more likely to be socially, culturally, and financially excluded, which further limits the achievements of the SDGs. So this is just a very concise way to actually link these three things together. And so for want of time, I think I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uchechi, for your presentation. Yeah, Fortunate, you can take
Yes, Victor.
over.
Yes. Thank you all for these great presentations. Very, very informative. You showcased very well that even though women are involved in a great volume of activities around agriculture, still there is gender discrimination in land ownership and access to land rights. But from the other end, you also mentioned what are the benefits of open data mapping as a first, I would say, solution to this issue. So many things to think, the participants, our audience, me also, about this topic. You raised so many important issues. Thank you so much for your presentation. So some questions that came in is, how can we convince governments to democratize access of land to women? This is a good question, I would say. Whoever is available can answer, or maybe the four of you could say something on that.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Sure. How can we convince governments to democratize access of land to women? I think Donin mentioned earlier that there are many African governments that they develop land policies, but they don't really include women. Would you like to elaborate further? What is the status in general, or any recommendations? How governments could move forward?
May I come up?
Sure.
Yeah. Actually, like it was mentioned earlier on, government have policies on land use acts, and these land use acts were strategically meant to make land accessible to every member of the society. And these laws are still in place. The issue of democratizing this policy, I would say it's still in the hand of the government, but the ability of the government to enforce this policy is the challenge. It still rests in the hands of the government. The government has made the law, democratically passed by the arms of government that are involved in law making. The issue that is impeding its enforcement still stands in the traditional land ownership system, and culture is a very hard nut to break in most African communities. Like my last presenter just made mention, it is only true when women get educated, through education, they get empowered, and they get resources wherewith they can come out and get access to land and own land. So that is by enhancing themselves educationally. So also women advocacy can come up, trying to sensitize women, educate women. It seems education is the way out. And by educating the women, you empower them, you get them to be aware of their rights, and they go for it. So talking about democratization, government has already passed a law democratically. It is there in the status book. But enforcing it now depends on the African society having a changed mindset from the old status quo of tenacity of holding onto land rights that exclusively give the right of land ownership to men and men alone and the first sons. So if women get empowered, get educated, and many advocacy go out there to enlighten women to take up their rights, that would be a way out. On democratization, it's already in the status book. Enforcement by government is another issue. And if we can have a government that can be bold to go out and enforce this rule, good. And let's talk about government. Those who are in government, many of them are the male gender. More than 80% of men in politics, people in politics are men, and they want to enforce the right of what belongs to men. So advocacy and education will do that. Thank you. Hello?
Thank you so much. Now,
Yeah.
because you mentioned, of course, that empowerment of women can be done via education and trainings and by raising awareness. Could you just mention some examples? How can this be done? Could you mention any examples of training or workshops besides the unique mappers, for example? Are there any other initiatives in Africa or specifically in Nigeria on this topic?
The unique mappers during their presentation gave us example of using the World Women's Day as an avenue to do that. Then in agricultural extension, we have the women in agriculture. Female extension agents, officers can come to play in this particular area. Then in most governmental ministries, you have the Ministry of Women Affairs. They can also come up with programs, organize programs, organize workshops, organize seminars, and particularly in the rural areas. The local government structure can also come in place where you can go to local government authorities and organize programs that will help to sensitize women, especially in agricultural issues and the need to own lands. And at the end of the day, like I told you, many men migrate out of the rural area. Some lose their life due to life expectancy of most African men being shortened. And they can also come up as a formidable group, women group, to raise up a voice for themselves to be able to get access to land. I think these are some of the things that can be done.
Oh, thank you. I think it was one question here was answered pretty much by you, Donina, right now, because Ibironke asks, who are the women targeted to be empowered to use the open data mapping? If there are farmers, is illiteracy not a factor of its successful use? If yes, how has this been addressed and how are the skills deployed? This has to do also around capacity building. But I think you explained it. If you have something else to add, please do so. Any other comment, or should I proceed to another question? Maybe this is a final question.
Let me say something in terms
yes.
of who we're targeting. So in terms of the open data mapping, every woman is targeted, right? So like I said in the open data mapping is just a tool where we have publicly available data for people to use, right? So it can be used by anyone who has so obviously you definitely need to have the capacity to map. And I think mapping, you don't really need a certain very technical education to be able to map. You just have to attend some trainings on what are the different tools that can be mapped. We're not really expecting the farmers to do the mapping themselves because they are the targets of the mapping. So it's other people who are going to, like different organizations, for instance, the unique mappers, who will go into the field to collect the data. So they are actually our targets, but then who are we targeting? We are targeting young people, we are targeting secondary school students, geography students, women at home. We are targeting, I think every citizen who has access to a mobile phone is a target, right? Because you can even there are a lot of apps you can download and that can still be used for the open data mapping. So I don't think it's really a very technical issue in terms of who is the target or whether illiteracy is really a very big concern, because I think even if you are not well educated, you can still get the education that you need to do some particular tasks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me just add to that. Let me just add to that. Actually, we drive an inclusive community in open data mapping. And when it comes to the rural women who are involved in agriculture, you need to show them what you are doing. You need to let them know how you can, why you are collecting a GPS coordinate of a farmland. And by so doing, you are taking care of the issue of illiteracy, and you need to ensure that everyone actually know what you are doing when it comes to open data mapping. And so every woman can be involved in open data mapping, because it's a participatory community engagement. So both the women in the village, the women in the urban area, the young women and the elderly could in one way or the other participate in the process of open data mapping. And so it's our responsibility also to provide the training and awareness to ensure that everyone in the chain of open data mapping would effectively participate in providing data that will be accessible by everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We've reached to our end of this webinar. This is also a very informative webinar. Again, there are so many issues to be addressed, or maybe better well put, these issues to be further explained and in a more depth analysis, because the role of women undoubtedly is well known, at least in the developing countries, but in the developed countries, sorry, but in the developing countries, due to maybe cultural due to the cultural mentality, there's still a way ahead. The good thing is that there are initiatives like the unique mappers that they target on the open data mapping for women empowerment. And I would like to thank all the four presenters. Thank you, Victor, Natalie, Utetsi, and Donine, for your presentations. Many of the questions of the participants have not unfortunately been answered, but we will send these questions to the presenters, and they will be able to answer, and then we will disseminate to you. I would like also to mention that this webinar, like any other GODAN webinars, is being recorded, so we will disseminate it as well. And thank you again, thank you all the participants. And I would like to just close with the remarks that with a phrase that Victor started, and I think it's very, very beautiful. I just quote it again, that the empowered woman is powerful beyond measure and beautiful beyond description. She is an epitome of a society that is empowered. I think it's very, very beautiful, very, very true, and we really, really need to work on that furthermore for sustainable agriculture, for accomplishing SDGs. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.